Hi, my name is Cushla from Therapy, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be invited to give this talk today all about working dogs. So let's get started. I'm going to share with you a few slides that I've got and we can get going. So as I said, I'm Cushla Lehman. I'm head at school at Therapy. My background is I've got a teaching qualification and also I was a qualification in personal training, which is what kind of led to my story with Garlemire Therapy, was that all the way back in 2002, we started to introduce the sport of canicross, which is running with dogs in harness, as you can see in this picture, to the UK. It had been a huge sport within Europe, but it hadn't yet really taken off in UK at all. So I thought it was my dream made in heaven. Not only could I go for a run, I could take my dog with me in a safe way, but I had no idea how to get started. I knew how to train myself, but I had no idea how to train a dog. And that was luckily chance I met Julia Robertson, who was the founder of Garlemire Therapy. And I said to her, I asked for her help and her guidance because though I knew how to train me, I had no idea what I was looking for the muscular and skeletal health of these dogs. And if we were going to build this sport up from an ethical and a welfare perspective, I knew I needed help and guidance. Fast forward to 2025, and here I am now, full-time Garlemire therapist, and even now still involved in this crazy sport. But it's not just this sport I'm going to be talking about, but it is the one I have the most knowledge in. But I think it's very, very relevant to the rest of everything else that we're going to be looking at as well. So, going on to the next slide. So the world of canine sport is definitely changing. So a lot of people are now getting much more involved in canine sports, whether that's everything from agility, obedience, scent work, man trailing, to our own sports here, which is a dog working in a harness. So I think a lot of shift within the harness dog world is people haven't got multi-dogs. So they've only got one or two as opposed to huge kennels of dogs. So that people are really getting involved now in this idea of just going out with what we call monosports, one dog, one athlete. And it's really had a boom, especially within the in Europe and the rest of the world. It is a evolving sport. It's growing all the time. And within the international scene as well, more and more countries every year are asked to join the International Federation. And I'll explain a little bit more about that later. So it's something that's really evolving, and I think it's probably taking over from a lot of the traditional sports, mainly because people have an opportunity to do something alongside their sport. And though I hate to say it, it's possibly slightly less skill involved. It's something that most people can do is by putting a dog in a harness and asking them to run. It's something that's actually doesn't involve teaching them a specific skill to do. So that's hence why it might be more popular. Now, this is my me taking part in this sport alongside my husband. These are pictures of me competing with dogs at the national championships. So it's me running with Mayhem, that really is his name. And even worse is Chaos is pulling my husband on the bike. And then they are together on what we call the dog scooter, which is Chaos and Mayhem. So these are quite high adrenaline sports. They are on the bike, you can easily reach speeds of 45 kilometers an hour. So there's a huge amount of trust needed between dog and the rider. Also, a lot of work goes into directional cues. So for turning left and right, for example, and slowing down and speeding up. There is a lot that the dogs need to know, especially when traveling at this kind of speed, because you've got to have a lot of, the courses that we're running are technical. As you can see, there's a lot of trees around. So we need to be able to have those level of communication that's going on between us and the dogs. So this is me running with Mayhem. As I said, it's at one of the national championships. For it's a winter sport predominantly within United Kingdom. So we generally run from September through till March, April time. Hence why it looks all the leaves are on the ground. Um, it's really the equipment for this sport is vitally important. And the most important piece of equipment is the harness that fits the dogs. And it's got to be a well-fitting harness. I have an embarrassing number of harnesses within this house, and that's because we are constantly changing the dog's harnesses because they may change shape, which they can do during their careers. So they might start off in one harness when they're younger, and then as they mature, they'll change into another because the musculature will change. And even at the age of 3 or 4, they may change shape again. So we are constantly looking at the fit of the harnesses, but it is the most important thing of that we actually have with the dogs is making sure that the harness is fit for purpose. The other important piece of equipment is the human wears a waist belt. Yeah, that is for my comfort and to make sure that my lower back doesn't get pulled about. But really, again, we're looking at safeguarding the dogs. So what we're looking at is a nice bungee line between me and the dog, but also the waist belt comes from a straight, nice line across. As you can see here, there's not much of an angle between me and the dog going down. So connecting us is a line which has got a large amount of bungee in it. And that again is not to safeguard me, it's to safeguard Mayhem. So to safeguard that if there's any jolting between us, if perhaps we're going over bumps, then all of that is absorbed through that bungee lead there. So everything that we really do is safeguarding their well-being. Again, you can see the surface. We choose the surface for races really, really carefully. You don't want to be running dogs on rough surfaces with stones and gravel. Ideal surfaces are these kind of forest tracks, which has got a nice amount of spring and a nice amount of bounce to them. Often, however, we are swerving through mud as well. But, you know, a nice safe surface for the dog's pads, but also for their joints to safeguard that impact that they have as well. So thinking about the other sports as well, the high adrenaline ones with the bike. So as I said, we've got Chaos here, which is taking Simon round a sharp turn. And then the 2 dogs here on the scooter. Again, we're reaching quite quick speeds on this. So it's really important that all of the equipment is safeguarding the dog at all times. You can see from the picture on the right that between Chaos and Mayhem, they've actually what we call a neckline. And that's just to make sure that they don't go either side of a tree, for example, although they're pretty well trained not to. But it's also to make sure they don't run too far apart. However, the neckline that we use is specifically, we make our own to make sure that they're actually that little bit longer, to make sure the dogs have their own freedom of movement and their own choice of pace to make, even if they have a line between them. It's a very loose one. Again, the harnesses. As you can see from a close-up of these harnesses, it is slightly blurry, but you can see how far down they always have a V shape to the neck. And it's really important that this actually fits right onto the sternum of the dog. So onto this part of the neck here. So it doesn't come up into the throat or onto the neck and interfere with their windpipe in any way. It really does fit really nicely around the neck, and there is no restriction around the shoulders whatsoever. The dogs have complete free freedom. And what they're wearing is particularly known as a crossback harness, but what it means is that there is no restriction over the top of the harness. This has got complete freedom. So if there is any flexion through the back of the dogs, then there is complete movement for them to completely flex up and actually run forward. So there's no restriction in any of those equipment at all. What we generally use as well, which is you can't see in these pictures, but is actually plastic toggles, which are known as Eskimo hooks, which attach the leads and the lines. So again, there's no metal clip that might be interfering with the dog or might be hitting the dog in any way at all. So we actually just use these, they literally are toggles that go through the ends of the line to make sure there's no metal involved in there as well. Again, everything is to safeguard the well-being of these guys. A really important thing that we think about as well is temperatures. So as you can see, as I mentioned, a lot of our races take part during the UK in the winter. So September to March time, we don't just look at pure temperature, we also look at humidity. So we use what's called the wet bulb globe system, so that we look at wind speed, humidity, and the temperature. And all of that is taken into consideration when we're considering whether or not it's a suitable race temperature for the dogs. This is something that I know I'm talking very specifically about, a very specific sport, but this is something that will really impact what I'm going to be talking about, which is looking at how we perceive the sport outside of our professionalism. I say professionalism, it's very much an amateur sport, and I very much welcome everybody getting out there with their dogs, enjoying their dogs, and really giving the dogs an outlet for all of those natural instincts they've got and the needs they've got. But temperatures is actually an important one, because our dogs are very well looked after by international federation rules, for example. And there's a new study that's going on at the moment, which is being done by a team of vets alongside sponsorship from a major food company. And they're getting their dogs to swallow thermoreceptor capsules, which gives us the opportunity to register the temperatures of the dogs post pre-race, post-race, and how long that actual dog's recovery rate is during that period of time. And this will actually reshape our rules, which will be rewritten when we have this information, so that we can really make sure that our racing rules, which are adopted by all the members of our federation, really safeguard the well-being of dogs. And that's something that we really take into consideration with the effects of global warming. This seems like a really tiny topic, but when we think about it, what we're going to be looking at today is also about how these sports have actually been adopted outside of that formal regimentation of a sport, but everybody can go out and do, which, as I said, I think it's brilliant. There's a huge rise in pet obesity alongside a huge rise in pet guardianship. And people are always looking for ways to go out and enjoy activities and involve dogs in those activities, which is brilliant. But it needs to be done in a safe way. And if we can sort of tell people and educate people along the way that things to look for and things to be aware of with their dogs, then we are safeguarding the well-being of those dogs, where they can enjoy those activities for a lot longer. And temperatures is just one of those tiny things, because, you know, as I said, dogs within the sport are safeguarded by regulations, but dogs within a home environment aren't. And if a guardian would like to just take their dog for a run, there's nobody to say, well, I'm sorry, but it is actually 18 degrees. I'm not sure, it's a little bit too warm for them today. And that's just one of the things that we're going to be looking at as we go through. So these are pictures of possibly what you might be thinking about when you think about going for a run with the dog. And it's absolutely brilliant that people are getting out there and having fun with their dogs. But I'd like to consider each of these three photos of a runner and a dog out with a bike, and just think about the specifics of each of these compared to what I was talking about earlier with considering the equipment. So absolutely brilliant. Getting out in the fresh air. The thing is a lot of people are just fitting in maybe a run with the dog because it's convenient. And I understand that. I've got 30 minutes, I'm between work calls, or my favorite TV program starts in an hour. I've got to walk the dog. I need to go for a run. Tell you what, combine both, and we've got them. All of that's been done. and I can come back to the TV or I can come back to the work hall afterwards, which is great. But as long as we take into consideration certain factors, equipment I know is something I go on about a lot. And appropriate equipment is we need to be safeguarding the well-being and the welfare of our dogs. So just for having a little bit more thought about this. Now, this dog here is running on a collar, for example, which will be not ideal because there could be a constant tug on the collar as they're running, and we know all the important thyroid and all the other really important musculature that's around the neck and the throat area. And if there's any constriction at all on that throat and the ability to actually breathe, it's going to become uncomfortable, especially as you've got a smaller dog with a larger person. So there's a really big angle between that lead and that dog. So if there's any tension on that lead at all, that is going to act as a restriction around that throat region and around where the collar is. So similarly, we've got them running with an extendable lead. And again, all that dog needs to see is something in the distance to bounce forward and come to the end of that lead. And that is suddenly going to be a whiplash injury as the dog suddenly recalls back really quickly. So it's not ideal equipment to run with. And also the thinking about the pace as well. We've got quite a tall runner with quite a small dog. So those little legs are going to be working so hard to keep up with that runner's pace because they're going to be having a longer stride pattern as opposed to the dog. And the fact that the dog is on a lead also means that the pace is very much dictated to by the person. The dog is unable to choose that, the pace that they're running at. They're going to be doing that constant gallop, which, will be literally putting them under a lot of stress on the way through and strain. So let's consider the bike. We've got a really active, by the looks of it, breed of dog. So they're going to love, aren't they, running alongside a bike and keeping up with it? Well, again, probably, but let's think about it. Again, the pace is going to be forced. So they're not going to be able to choose that pace that they're actually running at. Also, this picture as well is so typical of what you see so many times during, when summer months when people are out with their dogs. Let's just take in consideration again the lead, really short, so it's bunched up. So it's a really tight lead that dog's on. So again, it looks like they might be on a collar. If they are, they're going to be pulling against it. They're going to be panting. Their airway is going to be compromised. So it's going to be quite an uncomfortable experience for that dog. It's not going to be enjoyable. Thinking also about how close they are to the bike, the fact they could be knocked by the pedal, they might be run over by the wheel. That again is going to have, next time, they might not be quite so keen to go out because they remember that trauma and that uncomfortableness of actually being alongside a bike, that they are there. And again, as I mentioned before, the idea that they're probably on a collar by the looks of where the lead is. So that whole constriction around the neck region and, pulling into it is going to cause a lot of discomfort. So here we have a dog that's off lead and running alongside the bike. Well, that's better, surely, because they're actually off lead and enjoying the run and they're not, next to too close to the bike. And this picture does look quite idyllic, doesn't it? Beautiful blue sky, lovely scenery. But again, it kind of worries me slightly when we think about this pet dog going out for a lovely bike ride with its fantastic guardians. So first glance looks idyllic. Then we kind of break down each one. Now, that road looks pretty long and it looks pretty endless as well. So psychologically, it's really important, I think, for dogs to know that how long they're going to be out for exercising, especially if they're exercising at speed. For example, with our dogs that you saw earlier, when we were walking around, when they were in harness, is that we would walk the course beforehand. So we would walk the course the day before, so they would know exactly where we were going. They'd understand the course, so they'd know the start and the finish. And I think it's fine if dogs go out for an exploratory sport, explore, but how long are they actually going to be out for this? And it looks like a really long road. And just something to be aware of if you are taking your dogs out and you are working at speed, how much faster and how much more your dogs are working than just wandering around the park for a sniffy walk. And, stopping regularly, checking on them, do they need a break? Um, the other thing, of course, is it looks like it's a warm day. Everyone's wearing shorts and vest tops. So it looks like the temperature's quite high. That looks like quite a fluffy dog. And it doesn't look like there's any water with them. So I know I'm probably overanalyzing pictures, but these are all factors we need to take into concern, because the minute we take our dogs out on this kind of exercise, they turn into athletes. And that is a distinction. We now need to treat these dogs as a canine athlete. We need to be considering the surface they're running on. So that looks like a gravel surface. How long does the gravel surface go on for? We need to consider their paws. We need to consider their hydration. We need to consider their nutrition. And we need to consider their well-being. So I really, really love the fact that people include their dogs in these amazing adventures. But the minute we start doing either running or biking with our dogs, we need to change our perception of them. And they are no longer that couch potato, they are now an athlete. And we need to be looking after their health, not only from the skeletal point of view, but also from a myofascial point of view. We talk a lot about the skeleton, especially with the development of dogs, with growth plates, and everything. And we talk a lot about that. But actually, that's just the skeleton. What really gets a dog moving is the muscles and the myofascial connections. And this is what we need to be looking at. And this is what we need to be safeguarding. And this is what we need to have that education to those guardians so that they can enjoy these amazing adventures with their dogs for longer and make sure their dogs don't get any injuries on the way past, on the way through. We have to be thinking about the balance force transmission and making sure that they have that connectivity through the body. So these are all examples of the myofascial connections that go through the body. And there are lots of them, and they're becoming more and more mainstream within the canine. And all of these are responsible for different joining muscles to muscles, and it's that myofascial glide. And it's really important that we keep all of these myofascial chains functional, because any disruption to any of these means that a dog might start to lose that plane of movement. And that is where it becomes, dogs then have compensatory issues, because they're then compensating because of a lack of a movement or an ability to move. So we really do need to keep these connections firing. So with dogs are amazingly flexible. Look at these pictures. What a range of movement we've actually got. So with this flexibility, though, does come potential instability. And the instability can be because of a lack of appropriate conditioning. What does conditioning mean? It just means getting dogs used to using their body and using their body in a functional way. Because if they don't, then the joints can become vulnerable. So as we've got here, the pinch points might become through the pelvic region. So as you can see there, you've got the beautiful drive that's coming from the pelvic region. And sometimes if that drive is lacking, then it will change, and that will bring about a postural change, which we will look at later. Not only the pelvic region, because if you haven't got the drive coming from the pelvic region, then the shoulders, the neck, and the head are then going to take much more of that impact as well. So the dogs have got to be properly conditioned, because now, as I said, they're canine athletes. So we've got to really consider this when we start to actually exercise our dogs in slightly different ways. So here we have our pet dog who is ready on the sofa, snoozing away when we decide that we've only got half an hour. They need to go for a walk. I'll take them for a run. So psychologically, and we need to think about this from a psychological and a physical perspective. So our dogs need to know that there is going to be a change in activity. Now, a lot of our dogs pick up on all those subtle clues that are going on. If they're going for a walk, we put our walking shoes on, perhaps we put a different coat on, we pick up a lead, or we pick up the car keys to drive somewhere. And all of those subtle cues give to our dog that something is going to happen. When we're going to do some exercise which is slightly more higher intensity, we need to tell them that as well. So we need to psychologically prepare them for what's going to be coming up. And a great way that we can do that is actually by thinking about doing warm-ups with them. Now, we do warm-ups as humans if we're going to do some sort of exercise, which doesn't involve sitting in front of a fire with a hot drink, but rather coming around and doing our stretching and some mobility moves that we might do, which prepare our body physically and mentally for what's ahead. It's no different to our dogs. We have to do exactly the same thing. Warm them up, not with a hairdryer, but rather with a hands-on warm-up. And it doesn't need to be a long warm-up at all. 2 to 3 minutes is all it would take. Ideal time to do that is before you go and get changed, because it does take a little time to activate through the body. So ideally, as your dog, you encourage them off the sofa and you give them a really nice hands-on warm-up. All it would take would be 2 to 3 minutes. They now know they are not going for a sniffy walk around the park. They're going for something slightly more energetic, and it gives them a chance to get ready for that. The reason, and the vital reason for doing this, is to make sure that we are safeguarding our dogs from any injury. Injury is really has a huge psychological and physical impact on the dogs, because it's not just there and then. It can take up to 12 weeks, even longer, months, if it's a major injury. So we want to safeguard all of that happening, because we need to be looking at the ways that we can look after them. We know that there's the muscle tissue repair cycle. We've got the injury, the inflammation, the proliferation, and the remodeling. And as I said, with a muscular injury, that will take up to 12 weeks to properly heal. And during that time, your dog is going to need to have restricted exercise, and that is going to have a huge impact on them. So we really do want to be able to safeguard against any of this injury happening. So sometimes what we say about injuries as well is the fact that there's always going to be some sort of weakness there. When we break a bone, it's often said that that bone where it's broken is stronger because of the amount of calcification that happens at that site. We can't say the same about the muscular remodeling, because of the amount of collagen that's going to be used to mend those fibers, and that might be happening there, is that it's going to actually become much more less mobile. And there's going to be the scar tissue is going to be there, and it's going to be less flexible within that because of the scar tissue. And in some ways, that area is always going to have perhaps slightly less flexibility, but also more vulnerability. So we want to do everything we possibly can to ensure that we look after our dogs and we don't go through that whole cycle with them. Good way of doing that is for feeling for heat, before and after exercises, and to make sure that we can feel if there's any immediate heat coming after exercise or there's any hot spots that are coming up. And just by putting your hands on the dogs will give us a really, really good idea of that. Another way of safeguarding our dogs is to get good at looking at posture, symmetry, and balance. Now, we all have, and if you haven't, you're completely strange, thousands of dogs of our own dogs on our phone. So there is no excuse whatsoever not to be able to compare what your dog looked like 6 months ago to what they look like now. And it's a really great way of assessing our dog's postural health. So the dog on the right of these pictures here, you can see looks really fit and healthy. Why does it look fit and healthy? Well, it's because there's symmetry and there's balance. If we look at the musculature over the pelvic region, over the back legs of this dog, it matches what is going on over the shoulders. So although the muscles are different, they match because it's the same amount of tone on the back legs as there are on the shoulders. So the same amount of tone is there. So they're balanced and there's symmetry within the dog. The left and the right side match each other, and back to front they match each other. We look at the dog on the left of the picture and it's a very different picture. Why? Because looks like it's quite well muscled when we look at the back end there. Looks like there's quite a lot of bulk there. Is it appropriate though? And is it symmetry if we look from the bulk there to what we can see on the shoulders, where there's hardly any musculature going on through here? So what we can see with this dog is if we look again at the pelvic region, you've got this dorsal tilt here of the pelvis. And what's happening is the hamstrings, which are the muscles that run down the back of the leg here, have become very strong and they've become shortened. And they're actually pulling the alignment of the pelvis downwards. So you've actually got them strength here and they're pulling that pelvis out of alignment. So if the hamstrings are short and strong, what's happening to the quadriceps, which are the muscles at the front of this back leg here? They're going to be similarly affected, and they are going to be strong, but also long, which means they could be really, really uncomfortable to touch. Now, the whole impact of this is the fact that they have changed the posture of the dog, and they can no longer use these muscles to drive forward with. So there's been a postural change. And if they can't drive from here, they're going to have to pull themselves forward with their shoulders. And this means that this area and this region becomes really overloaded and congested. And the overload onto the neck and the shoulders mean that you have a shortened neck here. So that can impact through the neck. And again, you can see they've had to alter the posture by looking all the way down to the paws, and they've had to pull their front paws underneath their shoulders because their back legs are already pulled underneath. And this is where you've got the front and the back legs close together, and we call that goat on a rock because of the change of posture. So by comparing these two photos, you can really start to see the change in that posture, symmetry, and balance. Something else to be really aware of with the dogs as well is this posture, is looking at is the symmetry of that, and is the muscle appropriate. So with this dog here, we can see that there is a huge amount of musculature going on through here, predominantly around the quadriceps, which are those muscles at the front of this leg here. Looks really fit. Look at that, amazing muscles. It's okay till we compare it to the shoulders. So again, if we look at the shoulders, is there any development here? Not a great deal. Is the neck quite short or long? Again, it's quite short. So we've got this global muscle domination going on here. So we've got this massive amount of muscle mass, but again, they can't drive forward with it. So they're having to pull forward with the shoulders. So posture is so important to look at. And if we look at this here, you take the background out and you can really start to see where the leg positioning is as well. So you've got that little bit of a lateral rotation going on with the back leg here, with the back paw, a little bit of lateral rotation, and none of the legs are lined up. So when you look at a dog from side on, you should only be seeing the two legs at a time. So from the side, from the back, and from the front, you should only ever see the two legs. And here there is no leg alignment at all going on. Another great view to look at dogs as well to assess their posture and to check their muscular health is from the dorsal view. And by looking down on them, you actually can tell you so much information. So you can look at this dog and go, well, it seems to be all right. I wonder, I can't see anything obvious until you look quite closely. And then you see that they have a waist one side and not the other. So you can see that they're shortened through this side here and they're flattened out through this side here. And there can be lots of reasons for this imbalance, but it's a great way of actually looking at dogs. If you can actually identify, and guardians can identify, these kind of really subtle changes that happen, then we can address those sooner, we can get on top of those imbalances, and we can make sure that it doesn't progress further and have further compensatory issues, which can become more painful and more discomfort than the original issue actually was. And this is the last one that we're going to look at, but have a look at this dog here. So again, it looks like at first glance, well, it's got great neck extension. Yeah, but is it? Is it overextending? Is there too much? Look at how far apart the front paws are. They are really, really far apart. The same to do with the back legs, really far apart and laterally rotated. Definitely, if we look at that paw on the back leg here, that's rotated outwards, but also look at the splays on the toes. There's an uneven weight distribution coming down. The reason for that is when we look back at the main photo and see what little amount of angulation there is through that stifle, really upright through the stifle here. So there is a huge change of posture in this dog to compensate for so many issues that might be going on. And by taking these photos of the dog, by taking these lateral side-on photos and dorsal from above, we can just start to assess the way that they are presenting themselves. And by comparing from 6 months to 6 months apart, gives us a great opportunity to actually start to assess the dogs and make sure that we can look after them. The anatomical orientation of legs. Now, this is really interesting because we're looking at dogs when we're actually putting them under strain or stress. And what we want to make sure is that the force load going through them, the body can cope with this. And the body can cope with the load that's actually going, that's happening. So we've got a picture here of a dog that's not pulling, and you can see how straight those back legs actually are. But not straight, but actually how they are together and into the body. So they're in a proper orientation, if you like. As soon as that same dog starts pulling, look what happens. It's a young dog. They have not got the strength and integrity to look after that force that's going through the body. So the back legs start to splay outwards. And this is what happens with dogs which are not properly conditioned. And it's vitally important that they are at the age and maturity and conditioning that they can cope with the force that's going through, so that they are not going to get these injuries, and they're not going to end up with any of these postural changes that we've been looking at, and the compensatory issues that can also happen. So the reason also that that dog was splaying the legs a little bit, it was also something to do with the age. So the maturity is really important. I'm actually a committee member of the International Canicross Federation, and we have a membership of countries all over the world. So we used to be the European, and now we're the international because of the international presence we've got. And within the rules, I wondered about actually how many times age of dog was mentioned. I think it's something like 8 times in our rules that the age of the dog is mentioned. And it's vitally important that we consider this. So for competitions, bearing in mind that we host the World Championships annually, the dog must be at least 18 months old for canicross, bike during, and scooter. Bike during is the dog pulling the bike. No derogation will be allowed. That means that even if the dog is 2 days short of that 18-month-old birthday, they are not allowed to compete. And this is so, so important, not only from a physical, but also a psychological point of view. And this is a safeguard we have in our rules and regulations, but there's no such rules and regulations for people going out for a run with their dog or for a bike ride with their dog. But if we can kind of spread the word and get people to understand the impact of actually taking these young dogs out for this kind of exercise, then we need to, and the impact it will have on them long term, then it's a really good thing to get across. The reason that dogs must be 18 months of age is for injury, but also for their psychological development. Coming to a World Championships with a dog is a huge event. There are usually 1,000 competitors. We have 1,000 starts, which will be happening in Czech in November this year, and that's restricted. We did have about 1,400 people wanting to take part. So there is a very stringent selection process done by each country to send their team to take part in the event. At 18 months old, that's a huge psychological impact for a dog to actually undertake, because it's a very high pressured event. Athletes will be quite stressed, dogs will be quite excited and excitable. So we need to safeguard the dogs from that point of view. In my mind, 24 months would be brilliant, because also, even with the 18-month-old age category, people will be starting to train their dogs easily from the age of 12, so that they perhaps even younger, even below 12 months of age, so that they are ready for their first race at 18 months, which is why, in my mind, maybe older would be better, so that people are less likely to be training younger dogs. Personally, I don't let my dogs even start in a harness until they're at least 12 months. And how I would start then would be perhaps we would do a couple of 100 meters, a stop, and literally take the harness off and let them free run back. We would do that quite frequently, probably, I don't know, twice a week, until we then start to build the distance. So it's getting the dogs used to that idea, but also keeping the excitement of, yay, I'm going into a harness. This is so exciting. I can't wait. The biggest bugbear of mine, and the biggest mistake I see people doing, is that they're kind of given permission at 12 months of age to take their dogs into harness, because they must now be mature. And they go, yes, I'm going to go out and I'm going to do a 5K race with them, or 3 miles, because they've got their 1-year birthday. And again, the dogs are not physically or psychologically ready for that. So it's something we really need to take into consideration. A lot of people talk, as I said earlier, about growth plates when we look at the skeleton. Actually, it's not so much the impact on the skeleton, on the growth plates, but more on the vertebrae. especially in the sport that I do, when the dogs are actually pulling into a harness. It's that impact that actually happens through the vertebrae as they pull, with the drive from the back end and then driving forward. And a disease that's been certainly identified by our team of race vets is degenerative lumbosacral stenosis. And this is something that can happen to dogs which are not conditioned. And dogs, it also does occur a lot to working dogs, which perhaps spend a lot of time searching on their back legs as well. And this is something that, but I think, when we grab our dogs off the sofa to go for a run, we don't think of this kind of impact that it could be having. People are much more aware about considering running on pavements and on harder surfaces. But if you've got a dog that is really excited and really so overexcited to be out and is pulling hard into the harness and running along, it's these kind of diseases, but also these kind of conditions that can happen, which just people need to be made aware of and know that they're out there and know that they can happen. But there are ways you can prevent it, and that's just not starting dogs which are too young into these sports. I mentioned also that harnesses, a good fitting harness is probably the most important piece of equipment. And this doesn't matter whether you're running at my level of international or national level, or going out for a 3-mile run on a Saturday with your dog. The harness is vitally important to protect our dogs and to protect their musculoskeletal health. The harness is pictured here is a well-known brand, a well-known make, very popular with people, but you can already start to see the issues with this. You've got the band across the front of the chest, which is going to really limit that forward shoulder movement and that momentum going forward. You've got the hard case that goes across the shoulders. Again, that's going to be really restrictive in movement. It's going to be quite close fitting, and you're not going to be able to get that gorgeous stretch out that you can see that the dogs should be having when everything is allowed freedom of movement. Wearing a harness like this is a bit like wearing a really tight shirt. So, you've got the sort of shirt on that you really need to get something off the shelf in the supermarket, but it's so tight you can't quite reach up to get it. And that kind of restriction is going to bring around a really negative connotation and a negative impact to a dog enjoying an activity. If the harness is well fitting and a dog is wearing comfortable equipment, they're going to feel like doing it. If when you put the harness on, they're going, oh no, it's that again, they're not going to enjoy that activity, and they're not going to be able to have that freedom of movement that they need to be able to have for enjoyment as well. I can't believe I actually do need to put this slide up, but believe it or not, we run the largest online community for harness sports, canicross trail runners. We've got nearly 40,000 members, which are international. And at least twice a month, we would need to actually tell people and educate people about running dogs in prong collars. And it can be quite hard to believe that anybody would actually do that, but we do need to, and it happens, and we see pictures of it happening, and we have to educate people about that. I've put the picture there of someone wearing a barbed wire necklace. It's no different. We just need to be aware that it happens and need to have lots of answers as to why it's not the right thing to do. So we've talked about, harnesses and, fitness and conditioning. What can we do to make sure that dogs are conditioned to these kind of exercises? It's really simple. We need to think about what functional movement dogs have. And then we just need to enhance these with some simple functional biomechanical exercises. And all we're doing is enhancing these as we go along. Really simple, a couple of pictures here, is really getting the dog's nose down to the ground. Now, we've added extra challenge of some messy poles in here. And it's really simple because the guardian doesn't need to get involved in this at all. All you need to do is set up some messy poles or some branches, some twigs that you found, throw a handful of food or treats into them, and let the dogs do the rest of the work. Search out those treats, find the food, all the while navigating over some really simple obstacles. They're doing this almost subconsciously. They're doing these functional exercises. Their nose is going down to the ground. They're getting a really nice neck extension and head extension as the nose goes down. They're lifting those legs up over those poles to clear them. So thinking about that myofascial chains that we looked at, thinking about that myofascial connections, then that slide and glide happens, but they're almost doing it subconsciously. It brings in that lovely movements, those frontal, the left to the right planes of movement. They are not just working in one straight line. Some dogs might need more conditioning if they're going to be going for a bit further or a bit longer, or they're working. And this goes for any of the sports at all, is that, you know, working over simple tables so that they've got that drive and they've just got that really nice myofascial connection. But with all of these exercises, just think about functional movement. Think about what movements dogs will do. We don't need to be putting them on unstable surfaces. We don't need to be putting them on wobble boards. What we need to do is just getting that really nice chains of movement actually happening, and in a functional way. It's quite straightforward. So in summary, what do we need to do? Well, any dog participating in any activity needs to be treated as an athlete. So whether that is going for a run a couple of times a week, doing a sport, even going man trailing, you know, they are now an athlete and we need to treat them as such. And by treating them as such, we're going to be doing things like warm up and cool downs. And this needs to be included as a routine. So the dogs are physically and psychologically prepared for what is about to happen. They know they're not going for a wander around the park. They know they're going to be doing something of a higher intensity. We need to learn to read a dog's posture. So we need to be able to see those changes that actually happen with the dog. And by just logging your dog and just doing that little check-in every 6 months, putting a picture, printing out a picture of your dog and sticking it on the fridge, and then 6 months later comparing it, are there any changes that you can see? Have their paw position changed? Has their top line changed? Has their head carriage? Has their tail carriage? All of these really simple things that we can look at. Has anything changed? Because if it has, it could be a myofascial issue. And if it has changed, we can need to get on top of it now so that they can carry on doing everything they love doing. We also need to read their body language. And we need to see actually if they're still enjoying what it is that we ask them to do. So it might be that maybe every time you reach for your trainers, you find your dog actually going back on the sofa and sitting there going, actually, I don't really want to go. And looking at, all of those subtle things, you know, dogs are very good at masking pain and discomfort, and we've got to read that. Maybe they've just got a little bit grumpy. Maybe they've got grumpy with another dog they live with, or their interactions with other dogs when they're out and about is a little bit, grumpier. There could be a reason for that, and it could be that they are in a pain and discomfort, and we need to learn to read that and interpret it. We also need to make sure we include lots of sniffy, interesting walks for the dogs. So that includes going and reading all their Facebook posts and Instagram, in the park, all the messages that all the other dogs have met for them. That's what's really fulfilling for dogs. And that's what they find really it's mentally fulfilling for them as well as physically. So we need to make sure that that's included into their routine. And if possible, free running. And I know in a lot of societies it's quite hard. Dogs need to be on leashes that aren't, it's not safe to let them off lead. But if you can get inventive, perhaps your friends might have a larger garden than you have. And say, look, can I come to your garden for 20 minutes, half an hour, and let my dog off lead so they can come and run in your garden? That doesn't mean they're going to be chasing balls. You don't need to throw anything. Don't get interactive with them, but giving them the space and the time and the freedom to move as they would choose to do without a lead on is so powerful. So just getting inventive with how you might be able to bring that about. And the last thing I put here is fulfilling stress, appropriate and inappropriate stress. And it's quite easy to think, well, taking your dog to a sporting activity, getting involved in a sport can be quite stressful for dogs. It could be, and it can be, and it is, but it's appropriate stress. And I think it would be easy for us to all lead quite safe lives. Am I finding this presentation stressful? Probably, yes. Would I have skipped the opportunity to do it? No. How will I feel afterwards? Pretty excited. So, all of this is appropriate stress, and it's putting ourselves in a situation that we may not choose to at the time, but get so much from. And that's the same with our dogs, is they need that opportunity to extend themselves and enjoy that and be challenged and have that real kick of adrenaline. But also, similarly, they need an opportunity to come down from that, which is why we need to be able to give them those sniffy walks and not take them for a run every day, and make sure that they have lots of, other things to do in between as well. So that is my presentation. I hope you've enjoyed it. And I really look forward to hearing any questions that you might have. And thank you so much as well for listening. Thank you.